For those of y'all who have followed me for however long I've been doing the Good Morning Market podcast, y'all know that from time to time there's this one character that has popped up in conversation. His name's Dan Sanchez. So part of how I even got to doing podcasts was this gentleman who's joining me today on Good Morning Market was listening to B2B Growth and then listening to the Attention podcast when he spun off his own show. And that's what this guy, Dan Sanchez, does. He's an audience growth consultant for years and years. This gentleman in a variety of roles, now working for himself, has helped us helpless, overwhelmed, head-spinning marketers figure out everything from account-based marketing to demand generation to ChatGPT, and namely audience building. That is his MO. He has his own company where he consults. He also provides courses, self-service courses around audience growth for a multitude of brands, B2B, B2C, and a multitude of company types. I follow him on LinkedIn. I take some of his courses. I definitely highly recommend him. But without further ado, welcome Dan Sanchez to Good Morning Market. How you doing?
Doing well, dude. Thank you you pumped me up so much. I'm like, oh, I'm not nearly as good as your intro, but I'll do my best to help your audience get up to date with what's going on with audience growth and, of course, marketing and the whole shebang. So hopefully I can live up that intro.
Well, it's an entire world, no doubt. And I know that the thing I love about you is that you're eternally the student, because you know that you can never truly master this thing because people are always changing. The technology is always changing. So you take the student approach. And another thing that I really appreciate about you is that you can distill it. Well, what better way to distill a lot of these marketing practices and tactics and principles than making it understandable to a 5-year-old or a child? So that's my little segue into the fact that this guy here, ladies and gentlemen, has written 2 kids books, including the one titled "I Want to Be a Marketer When I Grew Up." So this is kind of my fun tee-off question. I have some kids. I have not necessarily told them, hey, do you want to be a marketer when you grow up? But could or should marketer be talked about with our kids about career possibilities the same way we talk about army men or doctors or basketball players or teachers?
It should, because it makes up a huge percentage of the workforce. When you think about, like, most people are going to land in business somewhere. And it's sad. A lot of people go to business school and major in business, and they're like, well, what do I do? If they don't know what they do, like, the most common default is sales, right? Like, what do I do in business? If you didn't go into business school thinking like, well, I'm going to go HR, I'm going to go IT, I'm going to go into marketing, I'm going to go into accounting, like, they end up in just like a general no man's land. And honestly, I find a lot of those people in business, or even a pretty broad range, end up in marketing because it can accommodate so many different skill sets. A lot of people end up in marketing because it also just pays the bills. Marketing is a very profitable profession. And if you're good at it, it pays freaking more. It's not quite like sales, where, like, the more you produce, the more your salary goes up. But if you produce results as a marketer over and over again, your salary can go, from like 50 to 60 up to 200K plus, a year, which is pretty substantial, which is just nice to be able to control a little bit of your destiny. And of course, it accommodates for so many different personalities, skills, ambitions that you might have. It plays well if you want to jump from there to an entrepreneur, because a big part of entrepreneurship is marketing. So honestly, I find it to be I'm like, one of my, like, side missions in my life is to make marketing a dignified profession, because it kind of gets looked down upon as like, oh, marketers are always they're the spin doctors. They're the kind of liars. They fluff everything up, and then I buy things and it's not nearly as good. But good, true marketers that are worth their salt, are honestly finding good products to back, and then just express those in a way that actually match to what people are looking for. So I think more kids need to know about it, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of good marketing needed for all kinds of good and noble endeavors and good products out there. And it doesn't get represented nearly enough.
And, 2 things that resonated with me. First one was a very kind of pragmatic argument for it is, you're right. Like, teenagers become college students, you go to any kind of college graduation, a big part of the folks going up on stage will be from the College of Business, but like, oh, that's where I kind of get the more pragmatic degree. And if you are some kid who just gets your general BBA and you don't know what you really want to do and you just wind up in sales, you're going to have some really frustrating first steps to your career. You don't just kind of aimlessly be in sales. You got to be on a mission to be in sales and be well suited to that. But at the same time, like you said, like marketing is cool. Let's just say it like it is. And like we are all interested in it because we all grow up saturated by media and commercials and funny stuff and insightful stuff and social media. Like marketers are are all the folks who are making that happen. So like it actually is cool. It's not like you go leave the quote unquote cool jobs and then settle to be a marketer. Like you said, if you develop a skill set and you have a passion for it, it is a cool, deep ocean that is a lot of fun to swim in.
Yeah. I mean, just as an example, writing this book, I Want to Be a Marketer When I Grow Up, was a marketing initiative. I was working for Sweetfish. We're targeting marketers. What better way than to help them explain what they do to their kids by writing a book that makes them look like a superhero, right? So
exactly.
We literally did this to just give as gifts to our prospective buyers, our customers. It costs like, I don't know, Amazon print on demand. I think it costs like $6 or $7. That's a cheap gift, but a really meaningful gift to give to or at the time, our ideal buyers. And maybe endear them a little bit more to us. But ultimately, Sweetfish was very much in the relationship building game. It's not like I put a pitch or an ad at the back of the book being like, hey, ask your dad about working with Sweetfish. That would have been going too far. But to create a book that helps them look good in front of their children, I know it worked. And I knew looking at it, it's kind of like, what other career do you get to make kids books? As like a project, right? In marketing, hey, it made sense in this moment.
Exactly. The creative thinking. So things like that are part of how you have helped grow other people's audiences, and now how you've built your own personal brand, you built your own audience. So I'm looking at your LinkedIn. At the time of this recording, you're right under 25,000 followers. I'm hoping that this conversation in some small part just go ahead and push you officially over 25,000 followers. You obviously have an email. Exactly. Let's get it done ASAP. He's like right on the precipice. You have a newsletter list, you have a podcast, you obviously have your own company and community. How did you build your audience, and what impact has it had on your career?
You know, I got to build my audience. There's a few things that happened. One, I was like, James Carberry, the founder of Sweetfish, was extremely generous in helping me build my platform in multiple ways. I also worked really hard at it. So it's kind of like hard work. And there was also an element of just freaking luck timing when it happened all together. So first, James Carberry had B2B Growth, a pretty well listened to show. And as soon as I started at Sweetfish, he's like, oh, you got to start hosting episodes. So I start hosting episodes and getting plugged in. So I'm already starting to get recognized. He also had a pretty large network. James Carberry is he knows everybody. He's a relationship. He's like a masterclass on relationship building for business. So everybody knows him, and he knows everybody, and he has relationships with everybody. So when I start posting on LinkedIn and James starts referring me, like my post hit harder than they probably would have if I had started posting a year ago without James's help. He also showed me and taught me what works on LinkedIn. So I had almost like a personal coach for a while, saying, hey, do a little bit more of this, do a little bit more of that for a while. And then I started taking off. And then I put for a short time to really kick it from 1,000 to 10,000. Gosh, I was putting 3 to 4 hours into it a day.
Dude,
that's a lot of time for 6 months. Right.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's generally what it takes for most people to grow. Some people get lucky and maybe just hit one really, really viral post or something. Or maybe just create a good system for going viral. Some people do that. They learned how to figure out how to engineer viral posts. I've never been able to do that. My posts don't go viral usually. And then the luck factor was, it was 2020. I was just starting. Again, I was plugged into B2B Growth. I was hitting it hard, posting multiple times a day. 2020, a lot of people got let go. There was and we're staying home, spending way more time on digital media. They weren't going outside. there was way more time and attention spent looking at LinkedIn for new job seekers, people that had time to kill. So I was hitting it hard right at the right moment. All those things kind of like factored into me growing to where I'm at today.
Would you
Or at least
liken it?
kickstarted it.
I don't know if this is a poor analogy, but like, would you liken it? So like people will hear the amount of like just blood, sweat, and tears work that you put into growing an audience for a period of time to really get yourself to like past those glass ceilings is almost like working out. Like if you've never worked out and all of a sudden like you start, oh, now I'm going to start working out. Like those first 6 months are not going to be nearly as fun as once you get past the first 6 months of the first a year. Well, now you're at a whole new mode of physicality, but obviously the first 6 months is where it's the most transformative, it's the most grueling. But if you can get through that 6 months of like, I think I just got to get in here and I got to work that's when over time it gets, I don't know if it's easier, but like you can have things, momentum working in your favor. Is that a bad analogy? I'm not sure.
No, it's a great analogy. And I have a little LinkedIn course and I talk about that. There's a little part in the course where I'm like doing push-ups as I'm talking about that particular thing, because it's like, you have to build the muscle memory. You have to put in the work. At first it's hard, but you get used to it to the point where you could be able to do push-ups while you're talking on a camera, right? It just doesn't become as hard anymore. The first couple of posts, freaking hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard to post 30 times in a row for 30 days. But I'm 3 years in now. And if I need to knock out a week's worth of posts, it's just not that hard.
Okay, so I can't take credit for that, guys, because actually, now that Dan says that, he refreshes my memory. I've been recently going through Dan's LinkedIn course, and so yes, I do remember the push-ups video. So there you go, right there. So you mentioned the 2020s. We are at the end of the third year into this very weird, interesting decade. How important is it to invite people to join your audience before direct sales efforts? And what I mean by that is, like, for a long time, when you talk about acquiring customers or selling to customers, you go right into stranger. I think you might be a good fit. Maybe you're an ICP, and I start to try to draw you in, or outbound marketing. Let me get your attention. We don't think about this now. It's almost like a friend zone almost with the whole audience thing. And you definitely don't want to get stuck in the friend zone, but it seems like more and more all the marketing gurus talk about an audience, and inviting people to an audience is a big part of how they eventually become customers, rather than skipping that whole step and just going straight to the more salesy part of the process.
You know, I used to be more romantic about it, but I don't know if you've listened to, like, Alex Hormozy here has been the book that I've been reading recently. Alex Hormozy's $100 Million Leads. He just released this book like a month ago. And honestly, he broke it down in a way that talked about the core four, which is like warm outreach, cold outreach, essentially posting to social or owned media. And the last one is running paid ads. And he has kind of like a grid he puts them in. You can do any of them and win. It's one of my favorite parts about marketing is there's not necessarily a right answer. There are certainly wrong answers, but there's many ways to win. Growing an audience and owned media, posting to social, email newsletters, those kinds of things. It is one way to win. Okay. The other ways can work just as well. They all have their pros and cons.
Okay. So how would you comparatively?
Audience,
yeah.
The nice part about building an audience is it lifts all the others.
Okay.
If you post and build an audience, your cold outreach gets easier. Your warm outreach absolutely gets easier, and your ads work more effectively because people will recognize you before the posts that you're doing organically.
Okay. So it is the tide that will rise all of your lead generation ships, so to speak.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So there's advantage, but you can win. You can do cold outreach. Cold outreach is a long game, though. What he recommends in the book is, I think if you're just getting started to business, warm outreach is probably going to be your best. You do warm outreach with posting to social is your best bet that you can possibly hope for. I mean, warm outreach is really just calling your friends and family and acquaintances or people you've worked with before and being like, hey, how's it going? Noticed you're doing this. Oh, cool. Well, I'm starting this thing up and I'm offering it at a discount. I'm just getting started with it. Are you interested? You know, that's warm outreach. It's just going to people you know. But if you're also posting on social while doing that and they're seeing you, you know, get some case studies in, like do it successfully, it's going to hit better because they're not going to be like unaware of what you're doing. They're going to be aware of what you're doing more likely.
And I think that the more I hear you say that, the more that as I've been learning from guys like you, that I've tried to implement in my own brand. Like where I am right now as a business, I don't do a lot of cold outreach. Like there is a way to that way. I used to do that for other companies. It's like your pure outbound sales kind of stuff. Right now, I do a lot of long term, a lot of LinkedIn and a lot of podcasts to build my authority, to build my personal brand, to build my company brand. And it also provides me easier ways to build bridges with strangers. But as I start to build up that while also getting more case studies, references, reviews, and other people talking about me as other people start to talk about my brand, then I'm going to do more and more national, like reach out to someone from the other side of the country who I found, and it is more cold, but I've been doing the work on audience building for years, like you said, to make that process easier. And so it's not as ice cold as it would have been had I not been building an audience. It's just cool, maybe. So let me ask you one more question before we get to this part of the conversation. Is in the past, I've listened to your pursuit to define some of these terms, and I've always found it interesting, and I still frankly couldn't, if I was put on the gun, would not be able to truly differentiate audience versus community or customers. Maybe some helpful terms for the listeners and myself. Where you are now at the end of 2023, how do you think of an audience versus a community versus customers?
Yeah, a lot of people use audience and community interchangeably. I pull my definitions from a book called Tribes by Seth Godin, which was written a long time ago. Fantastic little book, but he defines it really simply. An audience is a one-to-many relationship, right? It's like you think of like a man or a woman standing on a stage speaking to a crowd. That's an audience. It's the best picture of an audience because it is one, and you can do that digitally, right? When it becomes a community is when that crowd is talking to themselves.
Okay.
Right. And you have existing communities. You have Reddit threads. You have Facebook groups that are just communities. There's not even a leader of some of them. And now what Seth Godin goes on to define is like when you have an audience that is a community, that's a tribe.
Okay.
You have a group of people that are getting together for a common purpose or a mission or a topic that they're all interested in. And when someone is on stage leading them, guiding them, and is leading the audience, the community, then you have a tribe. So that's how he defines it. I find you don't have the community aspect unless your audience members are collaborating or talking to themselves without you.
Okay.
To some degree, you can facilitate it. You can have a community app, invite your audience into it, and get them talking about it. But you really don't have a community until they're talking. Now, some people will make the argument that like, well, if they all identify with the same kinds of problems and have the same desired outcome, and if they did get together, they would be like, oh, you're into that too? Oh, me too. And share like a camaraderie over it.
Yeah.
Then that should be defined as a community. I'm like, I could see it.
Maybe not quite. It's more like a lifestyle
it's not the same
and
kind
personality.
of collaboration and community. Like, I don't know, like my local church is a community. Why? Because they get together and they talk and worship and stuff together. You know, that's a community. But you could say like Gary V will talk about like Vayner Nation as a community. They're just a lot of people that have affiliation for Gary V, you know? So he calls that his community. I'm like, kind of. I guess they get together on Discord somewhere, but you know, I've been listening to him for a long time and I'm not really chatting it up with any of his other followers.
Right. Now, I would think that would be very, very different paths when it comes to if you're going to have a marketing strategy, you want to build an audience as part of your strategy, or you want to build a community. I understand, I think, a little bit more about building an audience versus if I was saying, hey, for Soul Insights, one of my goals is to build a community. Like, that's like, it's not
much harder.
Yeah, but to say, like, it's one thing to get people to listen to me. It's another thing to get people who listen to me to also then get them together and then them start to talk to each other about what I talk to them about or they talk to me about. That's going to be very different when it comes to actually building a program or building up long-term strategy around audience building versus community building.
Yep, they're two different things. Obviously, they can work really well together. You can build an audience through building community. You can build a community via building an audience. You can play it both ways. I consider myself to have more of the strategy around audience growth than community building. Like, I haven't actually grown a community to date. I'm like people will talk to me as if I'm the community guy, but I'm like, well, I prefer it to be audience, but I get it. Those two are just synonymous for a lot of people.
Okay, very good. So I want to ask you some more questions about audience growth and just how we can actually build our audience. Maybe we can get a little to the strategy and tactics. Let's take a quick message today from today's episode sponsor, Soul Insights.
This episode is sponsored by Soul Insights. Is your business looking to hit the next level of growth? For many businesses, they know they need to spend more on marketing, but don't want to simply shoot in the dark. They want a smart, data-driven path to solid growth. If this is you, then Soul Insights can help you to identify, attract, and retain ideal customers. Soul Insights is a strategic marketing agency which helps small and mid-sized businesses understand their best customers, who they are, their shopping behavior, and acquire new best customers based on that data. Oh, and it's all measured and tracked to ensure you get more profit bang for your marketing buck. Head to soulinsights.com right now and take the 90-second quiz to find your path to the next level.
One thing that I'm some of these questions toward the end, Dan, I'm definitely asking you for myself, but I think a lot of my folks, my audience would also resonate with these questions, also have these questions. How should audience growth relate to demand and lead generation? Because I've heard you speak on this as like, you can be putting out content and content verse and value first and put it out there and it'll come back to you. But like, how should it relate in your experience to actually doing demand generation and then actually getting those conversions in sales pipeline?
Yep. Depends on how you define demand generation, because a lot of people will define that differently. Okay. If you're on LinkedIn a lot and you're in the Chris Walker bandwagon, then demand generation means something very different to you than if you're not on that bandwagon. So if you're defining demand generation as in how it sounds, like you're generating demand where there was none for what you do, or your way of thinking, at least. It's not exactly lead gen. It's getting people to have an affinity towards you is what Chris Walker would call demand gen, right? Because it eventually leads to them coming inbound as lead gen. And that's what that's what he would say you need to do with demand gen, since he's the king of that term. Lead gen is capturing bottom of the funnel leads. People who have the pain, know they need a solution, are out there looking for it, probably on Google, or are asking their friends and referrals for information about X because they need a new CRM or whatever. That's lead gen, when you're trying to generate leads at the bottom. So audience growth has more to do with demand gen than lead gen.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we know that a certain percentage of your buyers are ready to buy, within the next month or two. And that the vast majority of people, let's say 90%, to keep some round numbers, aren't going to be buying within the next few months or this quarter. But they will be someday. Another chunk of them are going to be ready to buy the quarter after that, and next year. The problem is we spend all of our time, attention, and resources fighting over the 10% that are ready to buy now.
Yeah.
That's where most companies spend their time. Audience growth is a way to reach and stay in touch with and build affinity with the 90% that aren't in market yet. So it's a complementary strategy to lead gen, because you do need to go after the people that are ready now and make a compelling value proposition on why they should buy your thing. Absolutely. You have to have that. But if you want to scale, you have to go beyond the 10% and start building affinity with those who aren't ready yet. Building an audience of them and then indoctrinating them in your viewpoints around their problems is going to be the best way to do that.
And by the way, like I work most often with what I call small businesses and some of the mid-sized companies too, there's a lot of great things about small businesses. I'm a small business, but one of it's we're kind of reflexively and we're chasing what's right in front of our face. So everything's like short-term sales conversion. We're trying to just get the next quarter's dollars. It's hard to have a company think about that longer term vision. Is like you said, like only 10% are actively in the market. What are you doing for the 90%? And here's the thing, maybe things are going good right now, but what about 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters down the road, 3 years down the road? One other thing that was interesting to me, and I'm curious about your opinion, is what I think some people would intuitively maybe think when it comes to, okay, I'm going to do all this, like putting it out there, free value or inviting people into the audience. And then I need to find some ways to put in some demand generation, either for my exact product or brand or my type of product or brand, and it's almost like you're making a withdrawal. So all the audience growth stuff is deposit, free, entertain you, educate you, and then but I need to kind of make some withdrawals too when it comes to demand gen. I would think if you're really good at demand generation content, it actually could also help grow your audience. It could also help engage your audience and build affinity. Just because it's demand gen doesn't mean it has to be like an ad, or like it's I did this for you, now you have to listen to this for me kind of thing.
Right, because traditionally demand gen, if you're not in the Chris Walker crowd, means lead gen.
Right.
All my demand gen friends, I'm like looking at their job descriptions, I'm like, you're a lead generation person. That's all you're doing. You're running ads, trying to get people to convert on your demo request forms or consultations or whatever you're trying to drive them to now. That's all you're doing.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Okay. I like this conversation, because this is when I'm building out my little flywheels and systems and helping other clients do the same. Like, some of that stuff starts to blur together if you really can't think through these things like you have. Could you touch on these 3 methods for growing audiences? And I know people hate to get it all thrown at them, and you'll have to do the last one. So I'll give it to you one at a time. There's 3 for growing audiences. One would be guest appearances, and take that however you want to. Of course, my main channel is podcasts, so of course it means appearing on other people's podcasts. For other channels and tactics, guest appearances might mean something slightly different. But what do you think about that for growing an audience? Kind of like how you getting plugged into James and Sweetfish was a big part of how you get to grow your own brand.
Yep. No, it's great. It's also wicked hard to do if people don't want to invite you on their shows or you're unknown.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I mean, that's what PR is. It's guest appearances is a subsection of earned media.
Yes.
And I find earned media to be ridiculous. It's really hard. And because it's so hard, gosh, it's so good though, because it's always better to be featured by somebody else, like like a reporter just doing an article on you and why you're amazing. It always is more credible because it's not you saying it, it's somebody else saying it, right? So earned media is powerful, but also getting that kind of article that I just mentioned costs a freaking ton of money. Usually you have to hire a special PR firm to do it. And you're talking like 10, 20 grand a month to just get a few of those a year. And you're like, well, it's good, but is it 10 to 20 grand a month good? No.
No,
Same with podcast guesting. You can hire a podcast guest service. Sweetfish thought about getting into that game, but it was hard. And we didn't even want to do it because it was so hard to do profitably. That we were like, we'll just refer people to Speak on Podcasts, which is our preferred vendor we send people to.
Okay.
Is it worth it? Yes. If you can it's possible to create a discipline and a flywheel around it if you get good at building relationships with other podcasters and then having a good way to get on their shows. I haven't done it. My preferred way to do it is do owned media so well that they come to you. That's my earned media strategy.
If you're inbound versus outbound,
do cool stuff.
Yeah.
Build an audience yourself. Do cool stuff. Write stinking kids books. Throw out some cool stuff. What happens when every time I do something cool like that, people ask me to be on their podcast, and it works.
Yeah. If your phone isn't ringing, do things to get more people's attention. Put more stuff out there, and then your phone will start to ring more frequently. I gotcha. The second one, which I know you talk about a lot, because it's part of your podcast growth flywheel, is part of what you talk about with your classes and your consulting efforts, is paid media. Paid media is the second one I was curious about for growing audiences.
Yep. No, paid media has become my primary way of growing an audience because honestly, I'm still even fresh, only a few months into starting my own thing. And I've had enough people say no to audience growth, primarily because they're like, well, Dan, we can tell you really know your stuff. Man, this is really good. But we got to say, like, this is a lot of money for something that takes a long time to see the ROI in. And it still requires too much time from my team to post this kind of quality content over time. I don't know if we can do this. I've hit that roadblock so many times now that I'm like, you know what? Ultimately, the best way to grow, if you just don't want to put in the time, which is really where you probably should start. But if you can't start there, pay for it. A lot of businesses have more money for ads than they do time to create the content. You still have to create good content, but obviously, like, you have to hit it with a different level of intensity. in order to grow an audience. But you can still create really good content, keep and to retain an audience and grow it. If you're using paid ads to acquire new audience members.
Yeah.
And recently I put together this is becoming my business now, is like, how do you use paid media and not only to get an audience for the long term, but also short term qualified leads to feed the business, so it pays for itself while you're growing an audience.
Okay.
And that's becoming my game now.
And in terms
how do you
of
set up the right paid media funnel to do that?
Exactly. And in terms of like the percentages, is it more fuel to the fire where you have a core foundation built around the organic and the time put in and the creativity, and then it's amplified with the paid, or with your company maybe more often is it more even between the two?
Usually I'm coming in to grow their audience just with paid.
Okay.
They usually have, most businesses have some kind of content marketing going on.
Yeah.
And I will usually consult them on how to make that content better,
Okay.
and more appealing, because sometimes it's like thinly veiled sales content. You're like, hey, like let's not make it all about your product. Sure, we can speak some of those in, but let's make stuff that's like just the stuff that your ideal buyers are hungry for. You have some subject matter experts that used to be your ideal buyer. Let's get them on a podcast. Let's interview them about what they've learned and what works and what doesn't work for the problems your buyers are running into now, and start generating that content and dressing it up in a way that's fun and attractive.
Okay, that makes sense. I know for my own brand, like I'm trying to find responsible ways to explore and test, experiment with paid media, because I know that the thing, if you're only going organic, especially with someone at my stage of my resources, it's gonna be a very long road unless I somehow fall into going viral. So I'm gonna have to have a better over time paid media strategy. One thing that the final one I want to ask you about when it comes to growing your audience, it has really come on my radar a lot more recently. I've not really looked into influencer marketing a lot in the past, and also I am still closed-minded and ignorant enough where if someone says influencer marketing, I'm still thinking mostly of young female influencers on Instagram influencing under other young females, and like that's a huge industry, by the way. But actually, the episode that aired before our conversation was on like looking 10,000 foot level on influencer marketing. It's I think estimated to be a $1.6 billion industry. It's huge. It's not going anywhere. And I know that there's a lot of different ways in which influencer marketing can really help to grow a brand, grow your audience, however you want to cut it. So what are some of your thoughts or experiences with influencer marketing for an audience?
I wish I would have done it more already, but in B2B, which is where I've been for like the last 3 years, it like everybody's been talking about it. Hardly anybody's been doing it. This is the first year, 2023, where people are actually starting to do it. Like they're actually starting to put money into it. I know because I've certainly gotten a few people reaching out to me being like, Dan, can we pay you to like write a post about our podcast? Talking about our podcast was one post I did. I had another company ask me like, hey, can we sponsor a series that you're going to do on LinkedIn?
Ooh,
we'd love to just pay for you to create. And that's actually that particular company is getting smart, because they're just reaching out to people who know how to make good content. They're saying, hey, keep doing you. We're going to pay for it. And then we want to host it on our own platform, but please post it to all your other stuff. I'm like, what the heck? You're going to pay me to do my own marketing? Boom. But they're also creating a whole catalog of everybody's great content too. And it's working out well for them. So I'm like, dang, that's working. I've seen some companies like go and hire all the influencers, pay them out of marketing's pocket, maybe have them continue to work on for the company, but still continue to spend half their time producing the content they were doing. And now they wear the company's t-shirt, when they're on camera.
Yeah.
So that's working. So companies are really starting to get into this game, and there's many, many ways to win here, and you can get really creative in how you're doing it. Of course, you could just go after direct sponsorship. Hey, influencer, can we pay to like you post about us, our product directly? Sure. You could do that too. There's a lot of ways to win. B2B is now getting in the game.
Yeah.
So for growing an audience, if you're in the market for paid media, there's you could probably set aside some of that money for influencer marketing too. But probably if you're north of like $2,000 a month for paid media, I'd probably go to Facebook ads first. And if you're going north of that, you could start getting creative with influencer collaborations or just paying them outright for help.
Do you think that this so it sounds like we're really starting to now get into a big acceleration of adoption of that kind of tactic and practice? Do you see influencer marketing to be very rapidly evolving, or it's kind of stable in terms of the way people play the game and now just more people are getting on the bandwagon?
Oh, it's evolving, and people don't know what they're doing still. Like the B2B machine is the B2C machine is figuring this out, but in B2B, like literally I got a DM like, hey, can we pay you? I'm like, sure. Do you have like a Google Doc with like what you're looking for, like a basic one pager? I'm like, what this looks like? They're like, no. Why don't you tell us what you would post and we'll see if that's cool, and then we'll just pay you this. I'm like,
okay.
You got to cut me a check. You want me to send you an invoice? Yeah, sure. Send us an invoice. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
This is from a pretty large company. So I'm like, all right, we're still trying to figure this out here. There's no standard practices in B2B yet. Well,
marketers beware. That means it's up to us to come up with some cool ways to bring this to the B2B space in a really effective way. So let me wrap it home with this and land the plane. Is on your website, which is Sanchez, by the way. I learned this over time listening to Dan. The cool kids know him as Sanchez. Your signature service is the Audience Growth School. So it's on my docket. What was the genesis behind how you developed what is now called Audience Growth School, and what is involved in going down that journey?
I mean, I wanted to be able to productize knowledge. Essentially, I'm posting about it a lot, and I see people creating courses. I'm like, I'd like to create courses. I've created a few courses already, and I want to continue doing it. Where my wrestle has been is like, do you make it free or do you charge for it? And I released it as free. I've kind of pulled back to charging for it. I generally like the idea of having the courses available a la carte, but then bundling them all and essentially making it like an annual subscription.
Yeah.
So you pay annually for it, and I add more courses to it over time, make it better. So you'd want to stay. Otherwise, you unsubscribe. Just because I feel like there's more value that way. I can offer it for way less. Where I'm at with it right now is it's almost like a downsell to me, because I obviously make most of my money on consulting and service projects, right? This becomes something that it's kind of like an asset I have, where I can be like, hey, it's included in this, get your whole team in here. As well as something I can sell as I grow my own audience.
Right
now, I'm still playing with it. I still even consider going back to making it all free, but right now I won't be doing that in the short term.
Well, that makes sense to me. Is you have a lot of unique value to bring to the table. You have an audience, you have a brand, and so it sounds like with Sanchez, what folks can do is obviously there's a free relationship they can have with you, which is in front of the paywall, as some people call it, and where they can subscribe to the newsletters, they can follow you on LinkedIn, they can learn from you, they can listen to the podcast, and then there's kind of like the self-service behind the paywall. And if you want maximal Sanchez, where you can really accelerate your audience growth, the fastest and most effectively, that's where you actually get into direct one-on-one consulting. Is that basically how you're constructed presently?
Currently, but like I said before, I'm actually building another. Right now, I'm like, people hire me as like a consultant, or like a consultant, what I call consulting plus, where I'm taking over a role they don't have in their team, usually maybe paid media or something, and then they can hire me as a fractional audience growth director, just fine. But what I find people want more and more is like a done for you service that's like really well thought through. They hire me, all the components are done, and I just execute it all for them. And of course, if I do it well enough and get economies of scale, and build it well enough and can duplicate it over and over, I should be able to offer a value that's way better than what I actually charge for. Just kind of where I'm going to go in the future. That's kind of in the works right now. But
you're
right
not
now,
doing
with my
things.
consulting clients to like build it to a point where I can launch it and have testimonials and all that kind of stuff. So right now I'm in like consultant / freelance mode, but we'll eventually launch a done for you service company.
I like that. And like I said, the value long term will exceed whatever your fees are, because you're building a machine. You're not just doing things that you can't, that kind of, it's not like it's a consumable product that, disposes and then it's no longer there. It's going to pay dividends down the road from the house that you built for them. So that's really cool. So, folks, I I think we just tip this surface. I could keep Dan here on all day, but the cool thing is you can get lots of this kind of content. Dan puts himself out there, and you can pay him. You can take his courses. Dan, there's a lot of different ways I could go, but I'll just hand you the mic and closing our wonderful conversation. How can folks join your audience?
My newsletter. Just go to danchez.com. It's right on the homepage where you can subscribe above the fold there. I've recently figured out, I felt like I cracked the code on how to do newsletters well. It took a year of like fiddling with it and trying, but recently I'm like, I know how to make a good newsletter now. And the feedback I'm getting from it is really good, but it's still beginning stages. I don't have a lot of people on the newsletter, but it grows slowly. So go to danchez.com, join the newsletter. It's called Sanchez Says, and it's very 80s, 90s themed memes and content where I'm reacting to I'm reacting to other people's audience growth tools, tips, testimonies, or like methods. And I'm saying like, Sanchez says, go for it. Sanchez says, stop doing this, but it's fun. It's done in a really fun and kind of funny way. So check it out.
Yeah, I can endorse that from experience, folks. Once again, danchez.com, join the newsletter. It's funny, we didn't get to touch on newsletters. We don't have time with today's segment, but as someone who's tried newsletters in the past and decided to ditch it, one of your recent newsletter editions said that like newsletters are coming back, and like, that's really cool. And obviously I think yours is a good example of it. So a really good read, really good way to connect with Sanchez moving forward. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been really cool to see how you've grown and how you're sharing with us normal folks as you're growing and doing all these cool things so we can learn from you. So I really appreciate your time. God bless. And once again, thank you for joining Good Morning Market.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime.